In this podcast episode, Ben Shapiro discusses the current situation on America's college campuses, where anti-American protesters are gaining momentum. These protesters are largely against Israel, not because they hate Israel, but because they hate America. Shapiro highlights incidents at various universities where pro-Israel students are being harassed and targeted by these protesters. He points out the irony of left-wing protesters supporting radical Islamic groups like Hamas, despite their oppressive ideologies. Shapiro emphasizes the need for President Joe Biden to take a clear stance against these anti-American protesters and show support for America's democratic ally, Israel. He suggests that by rejecting these protesters and supporting Israel, Biden could achieve an easy political win. However, Shapiro notes that Biden seems unable to take this win, possibly due to the influence of the same funders who support these protests. Despite polling data showing that the majority of Americans do not support these protesters, Biden seems reluctant to distance himself from them. Shapiro argues that Biden's failure to take a clear stance against the protesters is political malpractice, as it alienates potential voters and undermines his credibility as a leader. The podcast delves into the well-organized nature of these protests, with groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now receiving financial backing from prominent Democratic donors like George Soros, the Rockefeller family, and the Pritzker family. These donors have ties to Biden's campaign, indicating a conflict of interest that may be influencing Biden's response to the protests. Shapiro highlights the hypocrisy of these protesters, who claim to stand for justice but support terrorist groups like Hamas. He criticizes the faculty and administrators at universities for caving to these protesters and allowing them to disrupt campus activities. He points out that these protests are not just random acts, but are part of a larger, well-funded agenda to push a radical anti-American and anti-Israel narrative on college campuses. Shapiro then shifts the focus to the escalating conflict between Israel and Hamas. He highlights Hamas's recent attacks on Israeli soldiers and humanitarian aid convoys, demonstrating their disregard for human life. He criticizes the United States for prioritizing diplomacy over condemning Hamas's actions and supporting Israel in defending itself against terrorist attacks. He goes on to discuss the Biden administration's decision to delay a shipment of U.S.-made ammunition to Israel, despite Congress passing foreign aid to Israel. Shapiro points out the hypocrisy of the Democrats, who criticized Trump for similar actions regarding Ukraine. He emphasizes that Biden's actions are aimed at appeasing donors and protesters, rather than prioritizing the safety and security of Israel. Shapiro also delves into the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) initiatives, which he describes as a form of cultural Marxism. He criticizes corporations for rebranding DEI programs instead of dismantling them entirely. He warns against the consequences of such ideologies, which he believes are detrimental to society. The conversation then shifts to Europe, where Shapiro discusses the rise of far-right anti-immigration parties. He points out the backlash against multiculturalism and the EU's open border policies, which have led to increased support for nationalist movements. Shapiro argues that the left's embrace of anti-Western ideologies is fueling this backlash. The podcast also touches on Joe Biden's mental state, with Shapiro highlighting a video of Biden appearing confused and disoriented. He criticizes Biden's performance as president and questions his ability to lead effectively. He also mentions a controversial statement made by Republican politician Kristi Noem, who advocated for shooting dogs and claimed to have met with Kim Jong-un.